Welcome to this Musical Passions podcast sponsored by City Music Cleveland. I'm your host, Eric Kisch, and my co-host is Jim Mehrling. This is a special podcast reviewing the 2021-22 City Music concert season, which has as its theme, Justice, Equality, Hope. Here to enlighten us why this theme was chosen and what it is represented by musically is our guest, Dr. Richard Rodda, who's been the program annotator for City Music for many years. Richard has written program notes for musical organizations all over the United States and taught courses on musical subjects. Richard was a guest on my former Musical Passions radio show, so this is a special pleasure to welcome him to this podcast. And now to tell us a little bit about City Music and the upcoming season, here's Jim Mehrling.
Thank you, Eric. In the tradition of Eric's radio program, Musical Passions, this is a special series of preview podcasts presented in advance of each concert of the 2021-2022 season of performances from City Music Cleveland, the Justice, Equality, Hope Chamber Series, as Eric mentioned. The concert series is supported by a number of organizations, including the National Endowment for the Arts and the Greater Cleveland Community Share, and a number of area foundations that you can see on the screen. But right now, let's get to the subject of the day and back to Eric Kisch.
Well, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Richard Rodda to our podcast. Richard, you're in sunny California, even though we're in sunny Cleveland. But tell us what is behind the theme of equality, justice, and hope. In what way does this get itself translated into music?
Thank you, Eric. Jim, it's so nice to see you both, even at distance like this, the miracle of modern technology when you push all the right buttons. Anyway, the real background to this particular series is City Music itself, which since its founding has been deeply dedicated to social causes, sometimes a theme for an entire season revolving around specially commissioned pieces of music, themes of homelessness, of immigration, two really remarkable programs based around Terezin, which was a Nazi concentration camp with a remarkably active musical life. There was a Brundebar children's opera was presented several years ago, and a remarkable concert of the Verdi Requiem, which actually was performed on more than one occasion in the concentration camp of Terezin. So City Music is deeply invested in social causes and representing them musically to bring them to our attention. The theme for this year, these are very broad topics and they can be expressed in many different mediums, but equality and justice and hope are certainly essential ingredients of the human experience. Equality is put first, I think, in the title of this, because if you look back to the most recent season, last year, 2021, the theme of the season was celebrating the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which didn't give the right to women to vote, they won it. And in celebration of that victory, literally a century of striving to gain the vote, there were a number of pieces that were commissioned, and women featured very prominently in the last season.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And wonderful, wonderful pieces of music. And the audience response to many of these things was remarkably positive. I think the audience really valued being made aware of these kind of connections that music can have with a sort of wider society. This year, the women continue to have a real strong prominence. There's at least one work by a woman composer on every one of the concerts throughout the season. About a third of the works in the season are by women, and all but two of the women are living composers. We'll mention them a little bit later. 8 of the works on the season are premieres. and all of them are by women, and all of them are commissioned by CityMusic.
So this is, sorry to interrupt,
Go
but
ahead.
what you're basically saying is that for the theme of equality,
Mhm.
one of the things that we're equalizing is gender, where traditionally classical music, certainly at the composer level, has been principally by, let's be honest, white male composers. And so this season is kind of redressing the balance by giving more than an equal share, in a sense, to women. Now, in addition to gender, Richard, you raised the idea of race and ethnicity as also having to be introduced into the notion of equality. Now, how does that translate into music for us?
Well, equality, seeking equality, inherent in that idea is that there are diverse interests that are trying to find some balance with each other. And so it isn't just equality that is sort of stands alone. It also is diversity. And it's giving a voice to a lot of diverse kinds of music and kinds of people. In the works this season, six of the works are by women of color. Three of them are premieres. Two are by Black composers, Jasmine Barnes and Florence Price. Four by Asians, born variously in China and North Korea, or of Asian descent, born in this country. In addition to those works by women composers, the December concert is a Baroque concert. And actually we have Latin composers from Spain, Mexico, and Peru. So we have yet another flavor from different cultures that are going to be part of this program this year. Other things where we have diversity and presented on equal footing in the concert situation, works from different historical eras, all the way from 1700 in the Baroque program, through Bach and Mozart and Dvorak, to pieces that have not even been written yet. Most of the works, there's a premiere almost on every concert. So those are still coming into being, which is about as new as we can get, I think, with this.
In addition to the elements that you've talked about, Rick, you're also going to talk about a generational effect, and that is that the works will feature both young composers as well as mature and very mature composers.
And I think it might be particularly striking this year because among the living composers, we have Margaret Brower, whom many remember as the composer in residence and composition teacher at the Cleveland Institute of Music from 1996 to 2008. And she is represented by a clarinet quintet this year and stands as sort of the senior member of the women connected with CityMusic's programming, the living ones. And on the other end is a young composer, new to me actually with Urgeni's programming, Jasmine Barnes, who just turned 30 years old. And the thing that I think is interesting of the music of hers that I know, and her piece doesn't exist yet. So it'd be interesting to see what that's going to be, but that she represents not just a younger person or perhaps a different style of music, but a whole different way of looking at what music is. And she's very strongly drawn to addressing social causes. Standing as representative of these composers of color is Florence Price, one of the first Black women, the first Black woman to have a symphony performed by a major symphony orchestra, Chicago Symphony, one of the first Black graduates of the New England Conservatory of Music. Born in Little Rock, she moved north as part of the Great Migration to Chicago and made a very successful career there, though as she admitted, she was always somewhat held back by the fact that, as she said to Kusevitsky, when she petitioned to have some work done in Boston, she had the disadvantages both of being a woman and being Black, and she had to live with that and still write as wonderfully as she did. The Adoration was originally written for organ. Part of what she made her living doing in Chicago was playing and teaching piano and organ. And she worked not just in churches as an organist, she also worked in theater when there was still live music as part of going to the movies. And this piece was written probably for church. It's very hymn-like kind of piece. Published in 1951 for organ, and it's in all sorts of arrangements, including the one we'll hear, clarinet and strings. This is a recording for the piece of a version for violin and strings. And the recording that Eric has chosen is really interesting. It's by a young violinist named Randall Gooseby. 25 years old. If you don't know his name yet, you will, because he is just signed last year an exclusive recording contract with Decca Records. This is from his debut album called Roots, which is mostly Black composers. And so he is on a mission that really parallels City Music in the way that he represents his social cause in musical terms. This is a lovely piece called Adoration by Florence Price.
Okay, well, let's listen and enjoy.
Music of Florence Price, that was Adoration, as performed by violinist Randall Gooseby and pianist Zhu Wang. This is our preview of the 2021-2022 season of City Music Cleveland. The theme is equality, justice, and hope. And back to Richard Rodda now to give us an impression of how justice is represented.
Jim, when I first looked at the concept behind this, I struggled a little bit with finding musical representation of justice. We think of it as a legal term, but justice is also a moral issue. And it really became clear to me just very recently in reading a book by a Northwest University scholar, Kate Mazur, M-A-S-U-R, called Until Justice Be Done, which is a fascinating study of Black rights of Black free men in the northern states. And a lot of it centers around Ohio because the restrictions on free Black men in the North were remarkably strict. And one of the issues that came up time and time again was the prohibition of Blacks of testifying in court on any case involving a white person. In other words, they had no voice. They could not be heard. They could not find justice. And it occurred to me that that's exactly what Dvorak was doing, Copland in this country, Bartok, composers who sought their voice so that they could find a just representation and picture of their country. And what we have in this series of City Music is a whole range of different voices given a just hearing. Dvorak, I mentioned. Paul Schoenfield, who actually taught at the Cleveland Institute of Music for a while, with a klezmer piece of his, Kodai de Falla in Spain, and the composers on this program, ones who are being commissioned, Kotoko Suzuki from Japan, Youngjun Wee from Korea. There are several others that are going to have musical justice, at least in the hearing that we have there.
Oh, that's great, Rick. We're talking here about, in a sense, national voices being heard. But there's also a special treat for us in the programs, and that is the rediscovery of a composer who is right here, or was, in the midst of us in Cleveland. Tell us about Charles Rychek.
Well,
Rychek.
Charles Rychek was born in 1875 in Cleveland. Musician, he studied violin in Prague, then he came back to this country, played briefly in the Chicago Symphony, and returned to Cleveland and was one of the founding members in the violin section of the Cleveland Orchestra. He was a teacher, a very prolific teacher, and something like 40 of his students ended up being musicians in the Cleveland Orchestra. And he composed, and he also composed quite a bit of music for educational purposes. The Cleveland Museum the Cleveland Public Library, rather, has his 25-volume treatise on violin technique, which remarkably is digitized online. And there are a number of pieces for 1, 2 violin small ensembles. And so there's a real wealth of music to hear.
As prominent as Rychek was during his time, I'm sure most of us haven't heard of him until now. I managed to find only one picture of him, and it's sort of a strange picture. He's sitting on the floor with the music all around him. But you can tell he was quite a character, as well as a composer and a teacher and everything else in Cleveland. So we're doing justice to him by presenting one of his works here.
Yeah, and having his voice be heard. He is, by the way, still in Cleveland. He was buried in Lakeside in 1962. So he is still started and ended in our town. I could not find a recording of any of his music except for a faculty recital at USC in, of course, a private collection on an old disc or something. So this is really going to be a premiere in Cleveland for all of us of hearing music by Charles Rychek.
Rick, the music that you've chosen for this set on justice is by a Turkish composer, a young woman, and Turkey obviously is a country in quite a bit of ferment at the moment. And what made the choice of this particular composer important for her to be a part of the justice component?
I think very few of us know about Turkish classical composers. There's a standard musical life, at least in quiet times, with orchestras, with conservatories, with a certain number of performers that we get to hear in this country. But Turkey is really an unknown land as far as its music, and the impression we have of Turkey is very different than one that might come out of a conservatory setting. Anyway, Füsun Köksal from Turkey, originally born there in 1973, studied in Ankara in Germany, came to Chicago, got a graduate degree there, taught at the University of Pittsburgh Middlebury College before going back in 2014 to Turkey to teach at the coastal city of Izmir. I don't know a lot of her music. What I do know is represented by a piece for guitar. Again, this is a piece that is being written or certainly not available to be heard yet, so we can't preview that for you. But this is a piece, from what I can tell, that represents her style, which is rather spare and really is a kind of piece that draws listeners in because there's not a lot of it. And so it becomes involving, almost like a stage whisper. These are the last 2 or 3 pieces that she wrote in 2018 for a competition, a guitar competition for contemporary compositions. It was held in Athens. And it's a rather striking performance, and visually as well as musically.
And I think you'll be quite surprised at what she is able to make a guitar and a guitarist do. You'll hear sounds that are not particularly typical,
Yeah.
and I think you'll be really quite fascinated with the possibilities that Ms. Kirksall develops for this particular concert instrument. So let's listen to a few minutes to the second and third of these 3 pieces that she wrote in 2018.
Those were pieces 2 and 3 of the 3 pieces for guitar by Füsun Köksal of Turkey, and a recording that is not easy to find, except here so far, from a 2018 competition of contemporary guitar in Athens. And we move on to from justice and equality to hope.
Hope is probably the easiest one to talk about in musical terms. Music, as we know, inspire an infinity of different emotions, and that's proven over and over again. Even in the current news, one of the really frightening things that has come out of Afghanistan, the difficult situation there, is that music is almost literally being shut down. It was a conservatory for young people. There was even an Afghan orchestra that toured in this country, including Carnegie Hall, just in recent years. And it was a really wonderful effort, but that stopped. And the reason, I think, is because of the power of music and the sort of voice that it allows some people to have in an authoritarian place. Certainly what we know about Stalin and Shostakovich and Prokofiev having certain styles of music prohibited. Hitler didn't like jazz. He didn't like Jewish composers either. And even all the way back in the Baroque era, there was what was called the doctrine of affection, which said that certain speeds of music, certain keys, certain rhythmic patterns would inspire certain music. And this was a written down kind of theory. So music can inspire a huge number of emotions, and hope, perhaps, because we all hope, is one that's rather easy to imagine. Certainly Beethoven stands as a model, where you have the storm at the opening of the Fifth Symphony or the Ninth Symphony, and then you have the sunshine that comes out that's hard won by the end. Beethoven said, music should strike fire in the heart of man. There's no loftier mission than to approach the divinity nearer than other men, and to disseminate the divine rays among mankind, which is about as exalted a statement of the artist's ambition as I think we could have.
In his opera Fidelio, which is really about a wife who was willing to risk her life to save her husband, who is imprisoned and about to be killed by an evil governor of a province, the subject of hope and freedom resonates right down the 2.5 centuries since Beethoven. So that, I think, is a fabulous way to kind of bring this podcast to a meaningful conclusion. And what you've chosen to illustrate for the subject of hope is a movement from Olivier Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time, a work that he wrote while he was a prisoner of war of the Germans in 1940.
By the way, I want to throw in here, what you're seeing is the actual program for the premiere at the prisoner of war camp. You see some of the people there, and a picture of the actual program that was used. It's an amazing story.
There literally is a book written on Quartet for the End of Time, and it is important. You both have said prisoner of war camp. He was captured as he was doing his duties as a soldier, and it was not a concentration camp. And so the situation was different. He said the worst part was the cold and the hunger, but they were under no imminent physical threat. So it's a little different than we might imagine of that situation. His creativity, I guess, was not to be stymied, and he found that there were other musicians that also ended up in this prisoner of war camp who played violin and cello and clarinet, and Messiaen, of course, was the pianist. They had a very sympathetic commander of this camp, and he actually helped them. He gave Messiaen a place to work, time, saw that he had manuscript paper and supplies, But the fact that it was created by prisoners, by a prisoner for other prisoners, and then eventually played for prisoners is absolutely remarkable. It's hard to think of a more hopeful use of music. And Messiaen was also deeply committed to his Catholicism, almost mystical. And each of the movements is headed by a different biblical quotation. And the last one has to do with God and the Almighty. And it's a very quiet piece. It's an almost motionless piece, and it's only for violin and piano. But there is this sort of sense of arrival, not in any grand dynamic way, but in a spiritual way, of sort of being lifted out of this camp, and of hope being the driving force that kept all of this going. And he got out of the camp not too much longer, and he did go back to Paris and taught for the rest of the war. So his hope was not in vain. And so did the other musicians, by the way. They went back and established professional careers in Paris after the war.
Let's then listen to a stunning performance from a very well-known group in Cleveland that Jim will tell us about after we hear this ethereal closing movement from the quartet.
That was the finale from the Quartet for the End of Time by Olivier Messiaen. And that recording was from Chamberfest Cleveland. The performers were Franklin Cohen, clarinet, Yura Lee, violin, Gabriel Cabreses, cello, and Orion Weiss was at the piano. And we move on as we continue our preview program for the entire season of Cleveland, City Music Cleveland for 2021-2022. And this next sample piece from the concerts will be including really all of the ideas of equality, justice, and hope. A very contemporary piece. Richard Rodda, what can you tell us about it?
She is, as I mentioned earlier, the youngest composer, living composer that's being heard. And she represents, I think in this piece rather well, concerns that are proper with young people and more powerfully expressed, I think, than a later generation might be able to manage. It is very recent because it refers to COVID. And before, normal never was normal is what it says. And it's very powerful expression of the words, but also of her social consciousness and her awareness of modern styles. It's really quite a delightful piece to listen to, but with the words, it becomes a very powerful. I mean, it's almost an element of hip hop, not musical style, but in this engaging social issues in a classical setting. I should also mention, speaking about classical settings, this is a very talented and aware person. This is in a good old-fashioned 3-part form: chorus, solo, chorus. And so there's something very satisfying apart from any of the social significance that it has. Normal never was.
It's hip hop in a classical ABA form.
Yep.
Jasmine Barnes wrote it, and here it is: Equality, Justice, Hope. Normal Never Was is the title.
The World Health Organization is reporting more worldwide cases Sunday than any day since the pandemic began.
Showed up today and it's just chaos. There's a huge line to get toilet paper.
And the U.S. has passed a grim new milestone in the pandemic. More than
pre-corona existence was not normal. Our pre-corona existence was not normal. Our pre-corona existence was not normal. Other than should not long to return, my friends. We should not long to return, my friends. We should not long to return, my friends. Return, my friends. We should not long to return. We should not long to return, my friends. 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 New garment. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment. To stitch a new garment. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment. One that fits all of humanity and nature. Ba-da-da, 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 da-da, ba-da-da, 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 da-da, ba-da-da, 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 da-da, ba-da-da, 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 da-da, ba-da-da,
The final piece, Jasmine Barnes is the composer, very contemporary work, as you can tell from hearing it. Normal never was. Concluding this preview of our series for City Music Cleveland, the Justice, Equality, Hope Chamber Series. This is one of a series of special preview podcasts. This one sort of incorporated the entire series, but we will have one for just about all of the upcoming concerts, some of which are coming up very soon. In fact, let us do a quick plug for the one on September 24th and thereafter. The first concert, I should say, is September 24th at St. Stanislaus and also at St. Jerome, a couple of performances. Don't miss that. Denise Ondishko, who was on our program last year with a new work, is composing another new work with the title of Justice, Equality, and Hope. And we'll see what that is, not until that concert on September 24th. Also featured on that program will be music by Nadia Boulanger, who is best known as a teacher of people like Aaron Copland and Elliot Carter and Quincy Jones and Roy Harris and Philip Glass, but she was also a composer. We'll be hearing one of her works. Also a piano quintet by Antonin Dvorak on that concert. October 1st, just 1 week later, is the second concert of the season, and then there's a long hiatus after that. So a couple of them very close in the future. October 2nd at St. Noel and the Maltz Performing Arts Center will feature Kotoka Suzuki in a world premiere. She's the premier composer on that, and then a work by Mozart, a work by Schoenfeld, and by Max Bruch, his selections from his 8 pieces for clarinet, viola, and piano. A lot of clarinet and string quartet in that concert. All coming up. Of course, the website here can give you all the information for the entire series, but those are the first 2 coming up. The concert series is sponsored by a number of endowments and funds, area foundations. They're on your screen now. And of course, by individual tax-deductible contributions by people like yourself. We thank you for listening to this. We hope you'll join us for our next in this special series of podcasts from City Music Cleveland and Musical Passions. I'm Jim Mehrling, along with Eric Kisch, and we thank Richard Rodda for joining us as well. and we hope to see you soon.